Today is Independence Day in Ukraine. It also happens to mark 6 months since Russia invaded the country. In Kyiv, public celebrations have been banned, and Ukrainian officials and international diplomats have been told to telework due to increased threats. And the State Department has warned Americans in the country to leave immediately.
While it's unclear just how long this conflict will continue, an advisor to the office of President Volodymyr Zelensky told The Hill the U.S. is, quote, literally saving Ukraine. We're joined now by foreign policy staff writer Laura Kelly. Laura is on the ground in Ukraine, and she recently spoke with refugees in Odessa and is now in Kyiv. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and this is a great opportunity for us, so we really appreciate it. Tell us a little bit. So you've been in the country, you just said, since last week, and what are you seeing so far?
Well, I'll just tell you, I'm in Kyiv right now, and what they have set up is kind of this doom military parade of Russian war vehicles that they destroyed, and they took off the battlefield, and now they have displayed them through kind of the main street of Kyiv. And I'll just turn my camera around for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll just show you this is an armored personnel carrier. It doesn't say how it was destroyed, but you can see like there are no tires on it. It's brown. From my vantage point, I can still smell like the acrid burning of it. And this was destroyed near the Hostomel airport outside Kyiv, one of the key battles in the early days of Russia's invasion. And this entire promenade is really kind of a testament to the Ukrainians' force of will to push back Russia's invasion. And the amount of war machines that they have here recovered from Russia and the destruction that I'm witnessing is really something to behold. And I think it's a mix of feelings here that people are kind of, maybe it's a little inspiring in what they were able to achieve, but it's also a reminder of everything that they have suffered. So it's a very interesting day here in Kyiv. The city was mostly very quiet, except for this man that began playing. It was pretty quiet on this street. And the streets were empty. All of the celebrations were canceled, and people were recommended to stay in their homes. We had a few air raid sirens today. So that was just today. And I arrived in the country last week, and I did kind of a tour from the south to the east, and then a bit northwest to Kyiv. I saw a lot.
Well, Laura, tell us a little bit about, if you could tell us a little bit about the interviews you did with refugees. Were they refugees from the eastern part of Russia where a lot of the fighting has happened? And if so, I'd love to know what they had to say about the conflict, how what they would like to see in terms of outcomes, and if there's any background about some of the reports we had and we talked about earlier on in this conflict about that being a more Russian sympathetic part of the country. Has any of that changed in the context of this conflict?
It's hard for me to give a full view on what is kind of the dynamic, but it feels like the polling of the country, and even in these territories in the south that were predominantly Russian speaking, the majority are with Ukraine. A lot of relationships have been severed because families that are maybe separated, Ukrainians who have family in Russia, who have family in Belarus, who some of them even have family in the occupied territories. They see a different view of the situation, and so it's really it's hard to quantify in that sense. But for the majority of the country, it's this very strong will to push Russia out of all the territories that it's occupying, and that is what Ukrainian officials say their end goal is, including to push Russia out of the Crimean Peninsula and the east. The South is particular because the Russians took over Crimea in 2014, but when they launched the invasion, they only they grabbed some southern cities, and there is a very close front line that the Ukrainians are fighting very hard for to liberate some of those southern cities like Kherson. In the east, it's a very it's a similar situation, but with different dynamics. And you have people fighting in the east that have been fighting since 2014 to liberate those eastern areas that Russia began occupying then. And it's the front line is very depressing. It's very difficult. There are incidents, what they kind of allude to every day, where people are killed, people are wounded. I traveled with some volunteers who were delivering non-lethal military equipment to these frontline troops on the east and also in the south. We delivered some helmets, and the response that we got for the helmets was just like amazing. Wow, we're so happy to have these. And it's not that the Ukrainian armed forces are necessarily undersupplied, but it's just that in a war, things happen, things get broken, things get damaged, and you need as much equipment to replenish it as much as possible. So those are kind of the big impressions that I've gotten so far.
So you would say your major impression is that the Ukrainians are very pro-U.S. and grateful for what the U.S. is doing and want that to continue.
Definitely. I spoke with an advisor to the president's office today and a separate advisor yesterday. Again, what he said yesterday was the U.S. assistance has saved Ukraine. And with this announcement of the $3 billion aid package, it's an incredible amount for them to continue to prosecute this war. But it's also an amazing gesture and a symbol of America's commitment that they hope will inspire other countries to step up their own commitments. I think you're showing on the screen some of my footage from the city of Mykolaiv. Very, very sad situation. The city is under constant bombardment from Russia. And these are volunteers from Odessa. And Odessa credits its survival to the defense of Mykolaiv, and Mykolaiv being so close to the front line. And Russian strikes have damaged the water pipes to the city. So people have been without potable water since about April. And so these volunteers from Odessa go into Mykolaiv, and they deliver hundreds of tons of water, and people line up as early as 6 a.m. It happens once a week. People are coming with baby carriages to truck the water away, and it's just an incredible show of solidarity and community among these people.
Laura, you mentioned that some people you spoke to did have family members who felt differently about the conflict, either because they are now living in Russia or because they are from they're in the occupied territories, and that there have been substantive disagreements within even intimate family circles about what's going on in the country. Was anybody specific about the ways in which they view the conflict differently?
I think that the best way to liken it to is the difficult conversations that we have in the U.S. and in kind of the political polarization, and how families have kind of been a bit torn apart over our own domestic politics. And some people have a certain view and maybe watch certain news, and it's hard to talk people out of their own narratives. And especially maybe with an older generation that was in the Soviet Union before and are used to kind of this change in regimes, as opposed to the younger generation that is more Western looking and has experienced democracy and understands how it works. Those are kind of the dynamics at play.
And does life feel back to something like normal in Kyiv, in the areas of the country away from the war? I imagine it's this very odd, it's the same country, but you can go from one town to the next. It is a place that looks minimally affected, and then a place where life is totally different. Is that what it's like?
In any situation that anyone is in, you find a way to live, you find a way to survive. And we had multiple air raid sirens today in Kyiv, and you have to adapt. And when the air raid siren goes off, you have to think about your safety. You have to think about where you're going to take shelter. And then the air raid siren stops and you're safe. And then you go about your life. You know, you go to a restaurant, you go to a cafe, you call your friends. Maybe most of us are working. I was working today. The people I interviewed were working today. When I was in Odessa, we sat for a coffee at a coffee shop, and across the street there was a food distribution for people who were displaced because of the war. Just because the war is going on, the coffee shop is still open. Those people are still working. It's just, the war is everywhere. You cannot escape it, but you have to live in it. And at the same time, hope that the efforts of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian government is pushing it to a conclusion.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us from Ukraine today.
Thank you so much for having me. I know everyone here really appreciates it.
And we will have more Rising for you after this.